I feel like the topic of FPS games is always such a boring yet actually kind of fun topic to talk about simply because there's such a broad, unbelievably overpopulated spectrum that it makes China and India look like an independent film studio. I'm completely serious, in the midst of writing this video, I had no idea how I was supposed to put it together. This video was put together and structured as it was written. I still have no idea how this is going to work because I have to make this video well structured, which it already isn't, but I'm also trying to make it consistent, watchable, and funny, which if the first two end up being true, the third won't. Hi, I'm Johnny Seizure, and if my name didn't already make it obvious enough for you, I probably shouldn't be doing this. Anyways, my point is that first-person shooters have been around for decades, and have changed a lot since their initial rise to fame within the gaming industry back in the 90s. How any of these games that aren't named Call of Duty, Halo, CSGO, Rainbow Six Siege, or Battlefield have succeeded so well in the past 15 years amazes me. This video isn't by any means meant to be a massive retrospective or history of first-person shooters, although you could interpret it that way if you want. This video is more so about how FPS games originated, how they changed, and how some chads from studios like New Blood and Bounding Box are resurrecting that classic type of FPS. It's funny because a lot of these retro FPS games that people are making now literally look and feel exactly like a 90s game of old. The first time I saw gameplay of Dusk, I literally thought it came out in 1997. It is the actual definition of a boomer shooter, and it fits that mold perfectly. Some games are just genuinely like that, whereas others take the more modern art styles of games now, combining it with the combat and gameplay of more classic shooters, and then making a game out of that. So there's that, I guess. Let's get into this. First-person shooters originated in the early 1990s when id Software released Wolfenstein 3D in 1992. The game was an adaptation of the Castle Wolfenstein series through the style of a first-person perspective where you see through the eyes of the character you're playing. The game was a commercial success upon release and an interesting new take on the Castle Wolfenstein franchise, especially considering the fact that nothing like Wolfenstein 3D had ever even happened yet at the time. Anyways, id was like, yeah, wow, Wolfenstein 3D did pretty well, I can smell money on them FPS games, and so they developed Doom and released it the following year in 1993. Doom was a massive success, ended up being a signature character trait of the 90s, and it popularized the first-person shooter genre as a whole more than Wolfenstein 3D ever would have been able to do. Soon afterward, literally everybody realized that Doom was a game and that it was really good, so they started developing their own spin on this new little genre like a bunch of little businessmen trying to capitalize on a trend and make their own money off of someone else's idea, but respectable. It's also funny how back then they were called Doom clones, simply because the term first-person shooter hadn't been coined yet. Some notable ones going by each year go as follows. 1994 had Marathon, developed by Bungie about 8 years before they released Combat Evolved, and it was focused more on lore and backstory. 1995 had Star Wars Dark Forces, an FPS that went and adapted the Star Wars franchise, which makes it funny how flat of a circle time is, as well as the fact that it's basically the reason the Jedi Knight series even exists in the first place. 1995 also housed the release of Hexen, essentially what would happen if the guys who made Berserk sat in a room together and went on a crack bender with George R.R. Martin and John Romero. It's a really stylistic game, and you can definitely see how it influenced some of the games I'm going to talk about in a minute in this video. 1996 had Quake. Now, Quake is easily one of the most important FPS games of all time as far as the future of the genre went. It was the first game to move first-person shooters to fully 3D rendered environments, and it also did wonders for AI and other technical aspects of the genre that so many other games would take from. Another very notable FPS game to come out in 1996 was Duke Nukem 3D. Much like Wolfenstein 3D, Duke Nukem 3D adapted the Duke Nukem games and put Duke Nukem into a 3D environment under the lens of a first-person shooter, and wow, it took off. The main thing that continues to sell people on Duke Nukem 3D to this very day was its personality. The crass, offensive humor that Duke had, combined with the quips that would make Spider-Man depressed, as well as the engaging gameplay, made for a game that people still fondly remember 25 years after its release. The following year in 1997, a number of FPS games that helped boost the genre came out, but I picked some of the most notable ones. The first one, and my personal favorite, is Blood. Developed by Monolith, the studio responsible for making the series with the funny NPCs, one of the best horror games of the past 20 years, and one of the worst horror games of all time, Blood was a darker, more brooding FPS that had more of a Lovecraft Lovecraftian aesthetic to it and an emphasis on atmosphere. It had nice level design and some great weapons, most notably the flare gun and the napalm launcher. Besides Blood, 1997 also had GoldenEye 007, which was something very new to the genre. Whereas previously games like Doom and Duke Nukem 3D had been predominantly playable on PC despite having console versions, the thing with GoldenEye was that it was specifically made for the N64. It's a great game, especially a great party game, but if you play the original version nowadays, it doesn't take any longer than a quick smack over the head with an iPad to realize that the original N64 version of GoldenEye doesn't hold up that well. That's basically entirely in part to the fact that the N64 controller is basically the equivalent to a mutated Dragon Claw with buttons and a cord, but I digress. Go play it with a mouse and keyboard and you'll do better. 1998 came, and the most notable FPS to come out of that year was definitely Half-Life. Valve's first game, and also the one that sweaty white dudes with RGB setups still haunt them with to this day, but for once in my life, I honestly can't blame them. It's a spectacular, amazing masterpiece of a game, one of the greatest games ever made, minus the Zen segment. It took the combat of Doom, the flow and pacing of Quake, and the atmosphere and horror of Hexen and Doom to create this three-headed monstrosity, only better than all of those games except for maybe Doom. Other notable FPS games from 1998 were Unreal, developed by Digital Extremes, and Blood 2, which I haven't played, but I've heard it's nothing special compared to its predecessor. Besides that, 1999 had EA's Medal of Honor, an FPS for the PS1 set in World War II, and a lot of games followed in this game's footsteps to be set in World War II. The thing that made Medal of Honor actually quite unique, for its time anyway, not anymore, is the fact that you actually feel pretty vulnerable throughout it. It's not a power fantasy where you're taking out legions of demons all at a time, you're just another soldier, same as anyone else, and as a result you feel a lot more vulnerable. It was critically well received and commercially a success, so EA got a lot of money. In 2000, Time Splitters came out, and it was super underrated. I'm hoping someday, by some miracle, Time Splitters will get remade in some way, because it deserves it. Then in 2001, Halo Combat Evolved released, and took the best elements of Doom and Half-Life, as well as Bungie's own style from Marathon, to make a first-person shooter giant with a brand that would dominate the genre for years to come. Halo did something that few FPS games around this time had ever managed to do to such a degree by creating an entire franchise around it. Sure, games like Doom had amassed such a following to the point where an entire series was made over it, but none to the extremely Chad scale of Halo. After this, the genre took more of a modern military spin with games like COD 4, Battlefield Bad Company 2, and millions of other games that nobody played because of how oversaturated this fucking genre became. Games in recent years like Call of Duty, Rainbow Six Siege, and CSGO have done a pretty good job of introducing people to that run-and-gun, pop in and out of cover style of gameplay that audiences nowadays have come to enjoy in games, and a lot of these games are actually really good, but none match the energy or the scale of what shooters used to be like. It's even more impressive when you consider how long a lot of these franchises have been around and how much they've changed with the genre. Take Call of Duty for example. Take the newest game in the franchise from November of last year, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, review coming soon by the way, and compare it to the original Call of Duty from 2003. They are completely different games in literally every way. Cold War is fundamentally the same FPS that people have practically come to expect like every year from COD, whereas the original game, the first game in the franchise, is a Medal of Honor clone for PC, and that's actually kind of humble in itself. I just think it's really funny how much the genre changed from its initial roots way back in the early 90s. As I said, the 2000s and 2010s were basically bulked up by modern military FPS games more than anything else. Games like Modern Warfare 2, Battlefield 4, Arma 3, CSGO, Rainbow Six Siege, all those franchises were thriving. But by around 2013 or so, older franchises were beginning to fall to the wayside. The last Doom game to that point was Doom 3, a game already a decade old, and Medal of Honor had it even worse. They had last released a game in 2007, Medal of Honor Airborne, before rebooting the entire franchise with two extremely lazy and uninspired modern military titles that weren't really well received by their audiences and fans either. However, in 2014, Machine Games released Wolfenstein: The New Order, and everyone reacted really positively to it because it was refreshing and it took the things that made Wolfenstein 3D and Return to Castle Wolfenstein so good, like the level design and combat, and implemented it into the modern landscape of first-person shooters. And 2 years after that, Doom 2016 came out and it was even better, and add to this a bunch of indie devs making their own retro-style FPS games and putting them up all on places like Steam. This is the part of the video where it becomes a top 5 list of my top 5 favorite retro-styled FPS games, and also games I would recommend to you if you're into this type of game and haven't played any of them yet. Shrine 2 was released about 7 months ago at the time this video was released and entirely developed by 2 people as a GZ Doom mod. It's extremely fun to play and it runs well and it flows really well too. After the first Shrine, which I thought was a pretty good game that drops in quality kind of drastically in its second half, Shrine 2 ups the ante by taking all the good things the first one did and making them better, as well as the fact that Shrine 2 takes the things that the first game did wrong, such as the level design and some unpolished weapons, and improving them enough to the point where they're actually pretty good. I had a lot of fun and a good time with Shrine 1, but Shrine 2 is a lot more playable and a lot more enjoyable. It's not super hard, but it's still somewhat difficult, so try to keep that in mind at the very least. The combat is really nice because the guns feel good. The combat is so satisfying. The art style is really good too. You're seeing it on screen right now, but it's best described as old school Doom with highly saturated pixel art, and that probably sounds horrendous, but I assure you it's actually really good. Also, while I'm talking about Shrine 2, both Shrine games, and just all Scumhead games in general as of right now, are entirely free to play, and you could probably run them on your Windows 7 desktop that you use for work, and the developers are working on a new game right now called Vomitorium, which Scumhead has described as an FPS Metroidvania with a focus on atmosphere and horror. It's slated for release at the end of July this year, so I'm excited to play that when it comes out. Anyway, you should support this game and support the devs, because their games are all free and they didn't have to do that. They deserve the recognition they get. Go play them. Post Void is a fast-paced sweatfest that makes my head hurt. It's literally epileptic Doom 2 with a pace of Hotline Miami and the difficulty of Guitar Hero 3 on Expert. It's ridiculously fast-paced, it's tough as fucking nails, and it takes the flashing lights warning to make it actually mean something. It's incredibly well done. The combat is great, it's insanely replayable, and above all, it's really fucking hard. You need to be paying attention to what you're doing. It's also noteworthy that much like Shrine 2, Post Void was made completely by like 2 people. It's also really cheap. You can get it on Steam for about $3 if you live in the US, and it's fairly recent as well. It came out back in early August if I'm correct. It's extremely fast-paced combined with its aggressive gameplay and combat makes for an extremely fun game. I mean, nothing beats almost going to sleep, but then remembering you should probably play Post Void because all your friends are doing well and successful in life and you wonder what went wrong for you, so you go, what do you have, as you're sitting here watching a fucking Johnny Seizure video and you look at your 500 plus game long Steam library, and so you go to Steam, boot up the game, Alt-Tab, load up the money store on Spotify to have it running in the background as you play Post Void, as your internal energy skyrockets from hopeless to actual crackhead and your mood turns from nihilistic to murderous. I can confirm that this works. It probably works great for background gameplay too, despite the whole epilepsy. Why am I warning people about this? My name is literally Johnny Seizure! Anyways, go play it. It's absolutely worth your time. It's pretty short too. It's only slightly under 2 hours if you can make it that far. Point is, go check it out. It's pretty great. I once said to a friend that Proteus on a base level, in my humble opinion, is best described as Brutal Doom for people that don't know how to install Brutal Doom, but also with a staggering amount of content that will keep you entertained for hours on end. Proteus, developed by Bounding Box Software and released into early access back in November of last year, is a hyper-violent, fast-paced sludge fest of a retro-styled first-person shooter that wears its influences on its sleeve. Doom is definitely what seems to be its heaviest influence, both the classics and the newer ones, but also games like Wolfenstein and Hexen come to mind in my opinion. The game's dev-made campaign is pretty good, especially combat-wise, but I think the level design is a little lackluster and Bounding Box could have done a better job with it. I don't think I'd be wrong at all in saying that the classic FPS combat in Proteus, in which the game is being sold on, is by far the absolute best part of the game. The weapons like the chain gun, shotgun, and plasma rifle scream classic FPS. It's brutal, it's chaotic, and above all, it's insanely remarkable. Where the game also definitely shines in my opinion is the level editor. I feel like Doom 2016's Snap Map mode opened the door for a lot of studios to try their hand at that sort of thing, and I'm glad they could. Proteus's level editor is absolutely fantastic, and I can confidently say that not even Doom 2016 handled level creators with such depth as Proteus. I haven't used the editor too much myself yet, but I've played through a lot of the things that people have created with it, and it's absolutely staggering to me. So many of the levels are genuinely insane. It feels like the actual devs made them. Go buy this game at some point and support the devs. It's like $25 in the US. For any fans of Doom especially, older, newer, both, doesn't matter. I would highly recommend Proteus. Absolutely fantastic game. Go check it out. New Blood Interactive's pet project, Dusk, was released in 2018 and was basically the game that started the whole retro shooter craze, and it's still one of the best. As I said earlier in the video, when I saw this game for the first time, I genuinely thought it was made in the late 90s. It looks like it came straight out of that time period. Basically picture Dusk as its own game, but it has its own influences, as practically any of these games do, and you could point out a lot. You could say Wolfenstein, given some of the flow and the pace of the combat. You could say Heretic, based on the level design, but I think its biggest influence, and most people would probably agree, is definitely Blood. It has similar combat, similar movement, similar level design, and extremely similar atmosphere. Speaking of which, Dusk was refreshing because it was sold mostly on its atmosphere and how it looked and what everything around you looked like. The Lovecraftian vibe and aesthetic to Dusk is something you could definitely say New Blood took a liking to from Monolith's 1997 classic. It's about $20, and I assure you, it is so worth it. A little fun fact for the Doom buffs watching this video, the soundtrack was actually composed by Andrew Hulshult, the man who did the soundtrack for Ancient Gods. The combat is nice and fluid, primarily due to the movement and guns. My favorite is the hunting rifle, simply because of how unnecessarily efficient it is. Another small detail that I actually thought was pretty funny, this game actually uses the same sound asset for water splashes as the one in Minecraft, just with a slightly lower pitch. I noticed it and immediately started pointing it out, but it isn't a bad thing at all, I just think it's kind of funny. Aside from that, the level design is really good, especially the first set from episode 1. Just go buy Dusk for like $20 if or when you have the money to get it. You won't regret it. If you have the money, just go get it, dude. So the rest of this video is going to consist solely of me giving Ultrakill and New Blood a disgusting amount of praise and sucking their dick to the point where it's probably not even warranted, but shut up, okay? Anyways, even though it's only in early access right now, Ultrakill is quickly working its way up to becoming one of my favorite games of all time. That probably seems extremely hyperbolic for so many reasons, but I honestly stand by that statement, at least right now I do. Ultrakill is a game developed by RC Hakita Patala, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and helped with as well as published by New Blood. It was released into early access on September 3rd of 2020, and it is absolute carnage. I seriously cannot get over how unbelievably good it is. Picture it as a mix of Doom Eternal's movement and pace combined with a Quake-inspired art style and Devil May Cry's combat and fluidity. Those three games mix way better here than I ever thought they would ever be able to do. So much about Ultrakill is worth talking about. It has a fantastic art direction, which is always a good thing. It has great level design. The combat is fun, especially since it puts movement as an essential above all else. The boss fights make me scream in agony, but they're still really good. My personal favorite boss fight is V2 because he's basically your equal, and if you aren't good at the game, you're in for a rough time. He can calculate what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. He can easily take you out if you don't know what you're doing, so make sure you're actually paying close attention. Other good bosses include Cerberus, Minos, and the Sword Fighter. It also brings back the Endless mode from Dusk in the form of the Cyber Grind, but adapts the map to Ultrakill's movement. It's just a fantastic game, and I can't wait until there's more to it. It's about $20, and the campaign is approximately 6 to 8 hours long, give or take. Go check it out, it's absolutely phenomenal. It's definitely worth your time and money, especially if you're a fan of DMC, Doom Eternal, or Quake. I can't wait to see what else New Blood does with this game. Thanks for watching, I'm glad you stuck around this long. I had this video in mind a while ago, and truth be told, I've been very lazy about it, given the Halo retrospective and all that. Obviously, this video is far different, but still, thanks for the massive support on that video, by the way. Anyways, I've been lazy about this video, but nonetheless, we're here now, so if you got this far, thanks. It means a lot. Also, I tried to inject a lot more sarcasm and humor into the script because I'm trying to experiment with that a little more. Let me know if you guys like that or not. I have more content on the way, but if any of you have any requests for videos you want me to make, just send me some in the comments and I'll take a look. Anyways, my name is Johnny Seizure. I will see you guys later.